3 days before I was supposed to sign the retirement papers and hand my bakery over to my son, a woman I barely knew pulled me into the back of her flower shop and told me to stop breathing so loud. I almost laughed. Eleanor Marsh had sold flowers on the corner of Birchwood Avenue for 20 years. I knew her the way you know anyone in a small town, by sight, by name, by the wave you exchange across a parking lot. We had never once sat down for coffee. But that Tuesday afternoon, she grabbed my elbow so hard I nearly dropped my purse, pulled me past the buckets of peonies and the refrigerated roses, through a narrow door I hadn't known existed, and pressed her finger to her lips. "I'm grateful you're here with me today. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love knowing how far these stories reach. And I want to be upfront with you, some elements of this story have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. But the heart of it, the betrayal, the silence, the choice I had to make, that part is as real as anything I've ever lived through. My name is Margaret. I'm 63 years old. I built Ashford's bakery with my own hands in 1987, the year my husband Gerald passed away from a stroke at 51. Leaving me with a 12-year-old son, a mortgaged house, and a small commercial kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and old debt. I didn't know the first thing about running a business. I knew how to bake. My mother had taught me when I was 7 years old, standing on a step stool in her kitchen in rural Ohio, measuring flour by feel rather than by cup. When Gerald died, baking was the only thing I trusted. So I baked. I baked until my hands cracked and my feet ached, and the orders started coming in faster than I could fill them. By 1995, I had 4 employees. By 2003, 12. By 2015, Ashford's had 3 locations in Clover Falls, Tennessee, a wholesale contract with 2 regional grocery chains, and a reputation that had taken me 28 years to build from nothing. My son Nathan had grown up inside those walls. He learned to knead dough before he learned to drive. He went to culinary school in Nashville, came back at 25, and worked beside me for the better part of a decade. He was talented, patient, and I trusted him the way you trust someone you raised yourself, which is to say completely and without condition. That was my first mistake, not trusting him. That part wasn't wrong. What was wrong was that I stopped paying attention to who he was becoming. In 2019, Nathan met a man named Preston Cole at a business conference in Knoxville. Preston was 42, polished in the way that people who've never done physical labor tend to be polished. He had an MBA from Vanderbilt and a habit of dropping the names of investors into casual conversation like punctuation. He told Nathan he specialized in small business growth strategy, which I later understood to mean he specialized in identifying family businesses whose owners were aging and whose children were impatient. By 2020, Nathan had brought Preston on as a growth consultant. I shook his hand at the first meeting, smiled, and said we'd be in touch. Something about him made the back of my neck feel cold. I ignored it. I had ignored that feeling before and been wrong. I thought I might be wrong again. I was not wrong. But I didn't know that yet, not until Eleanor Marsh pressed me into the back of her flower shop and held her breath alongside mine. Through the wall, I heard voices. Nathan's voice first, lower than usual, careful. "She's already agreed to the timeline. 60 days after signing, the transfer completes. She'll be in Asheville by fall." A second voice. "Preston." Smooth, the way a floor looks smooth before you notice the crack running through it. "And the consulting fee comes out before the sale closes." "Before," Nathan said. "She won't see the final number until after." I put my hand against the wall to steady myself. A third voice, one I recognized with a sick lurch in my chest. Carol Simmons, my accountant for 16 years. The woman who had helped me navigate Gerald's estate, who had sat across from me at my kitchen table every April with a thermos of coffee and the patience of a saint. "The Greenfield offer is at 2.1, Carol said. "If we reclassify the wholesale contracts as liability rather than asset, I can bring the valuation down to 1.4 before Margaret sees it." Silence. Then Preston again. "And the difference? Moves to the holding account," Carol said. "Same as we discussed." Eleanor's hand found mine in the dark. She squeezed once, hard. I did not make a sound. I stood there in the smell of cut stems and cold water and let what I was hearing settle over me like cement. $700,000. That was the difference between $2.1 million and $1.4 million. $700,000 that my son and my accountant and a man I had never fully trusted were planning to move somewhere I would never see it, while I signed away 28 years of my life at a table I thought was surrounded by people who loved me. I heard chairs move, footsteps, a door. Eleanor turned on the light. Her eyes were red at the edges. She had been crying before I arrived. "How long?" I asked. "I heard them last Thursday," she whispered. Same conversation, almost word for word. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should call you or if I was misunderstanding something or... She stopped. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I should have come to you sooner." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who sold flowers and had never once asked me for anything. "You came now," I said. "That's what matters." I picked up my purse from the floor where I'd dropped it. I walked back through the peonies and out the front door into the October afternoon. Clover Falls looked exactly the same as it always had. The maple trees along Birchwood were turning orange. A man was walking a dog the color of caramel. 2 teenagers sat on the bench outside the pharmacy looking at their phones. I sat in my car for 11 minutes without starting the engine. Retirement had been Nathan's idea. He had raised it carefully, the way you raise something you've been rehearsing. "Mom, you've been running this place since before I could reach the counter. You deserve to rest. You deserve to travel. You always said you wanted to see Vermont in the fall." I had said that. I had said it once, in passing, maybe 5 years ago. He had remembered. He had used it. I thought about the last 14 months. The small moments I had cataloged and then dismissed. The meeting in February where I had introduced a new supplier and Preston had talked over me for 6 minutes without pausing. The morning in May when I had arrived at the Birchwood location to find the sign had been updated. The font changed, the color shifted, no one had told me. Nathan's explanation: "It was just a refresh, Mom, nothing major." And Carol, who'd have been increasingly vague on quarterly numbers, who had started emailing me summaries instead of sitting with me, who had said twice in the past year, in different ways, that the business had gotten complex and that I should consider stepping back from the financial day-to-day. I had thought she was being considerate. I started the car. My attorney's name was Ruth Calloway. She had an office above the hardware store on Clement Street, and she had been handling my business contracts since 2005. I had called her from the road, told her nothing specific, said only that something had come up and that it was urgent. She was waiting for me when I arrived. I sat down across from her desk and told her everything. The voices through the wall, the numbers, the holding account, Carol's name. Ruth did not interrupt. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, and she wrote in long, looping lines. And when I finished, she set down her pen and said, "When are you supposed to sign?" "Friday," I said. 3 days. She looked at her pad. "Who else has seen the Greenfield offer documents?" "Just me." "Carol prepared them. I haven't had them reviewed independently." I paused. I trusted her. Ruth didn't say anything for a moment. "Then, do you have access to your business accounts right now? Tonight?" "I have the login. I haven't checked them in, honestly, months." "Carol handles the reconciliation." "Check them tonight," Ruth said quietly. "Every account, every transaction over $5,000 in the last 18 months. Write down anything that looks unfamiliar." I nodded. "And Margaret, don't sign anything. Don't tell Nathan you're not signing. Don't change your behavior at all." She met my eyes. 3 days. We moved quietly. I drove home along roads I had driven for 30 years. My farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel lane with a cedar fence along the front and Gerald's apple tree in the yard, the one he planted the spring before he died, because he said he wanted something to grow slowly. It was heavy with fruit now, ungathered, beginning to fall. I made tea. I didn't drink. I opened my laptop. It took me 2 hours to go through the accounts. What I found made me sit back in my chair and press both hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking. 41 transactions over 14 months. Transfers ranging from $38,000 to $38,000, all labeled with vendor codes I didn't recognize, all flowing out of the Ashford operating account into an entity called Ridgeline Business Partners LLC. I had never heard of Ridgeline Business Partners LLC. I had never heard of Ridgeline Business Partners. I had never authorized a single one of those transfers. Total $212,000 gone. Moved while I was baking bread and trusting the people around me. I wrote down every transaction number. I took screenshots. I closed the laptop and sat in Gerald's chair by the window for a long time. The apple tree stood in the dark yard, still and patient. In 28 years, I had survived a funeral, a recession, a kitchen fire, a partnership that fell apart, 2 floods, and 1 summer where I wasn't sure I could make payroll. I had never once considered that the threat would come from inside. I picked up my phone. Ruth had tested a name, Daniel Cho, CPA and forensic accountant based in Nashville. Available immediately. Referred twice this year. She trusted him. I called the number. He answered on the second ring. By 11 that night, Daniel was at my kitchen table with a laptop and a portable drive. He was 40, quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from precision rather than shyness. He went through what I had found, then went further. 3 years back, not 14 months. At 1 in the morning, he looked up from his screen. Ridgeline Business Partners LLC was registered in Delaware in March of last year, he said. 2 principals, Preston Cole and Nathan Ashford. I had known it was possible. Hearing it stated plainly still felt like a door closing in a room I'd thought was open. There's more, Daniel said. He turned the screen toward me. A second entity. Crestwood Advisory Group. Registered 2 months later. 1 principal, Carol Simmons. Crestwood had received 4 payments from Ridgeline over the past year. The most recent was $45,000, wired 10 days ago. She's being paid out of money they took from you, Daniel said. The valuation manipulation, the reclassification of the wholesale contracts, she constructed the paper trail. They needed someone inside the financials. I looked at Carol's name on the screen for a long time. 16 years. She had known Gerald. She had come to his memorial. She had brought me casseroles in the months after. Can you document all of this in a format that an attorney can use? I asked. By tomorrow afternoon, he said. Then I need you to keep working. He nodded and turned back to his screen. I went to bed at 2. I lay on top of the covers in the dark and thought about Nathan. Not who he had become in the last 2 years, but who he had been before that. The small boy who fell asleep in the bakery on Sunday mornings while I prepped for the week, curled up on the flour sacks with his jacket as a pillow. The teenager who learned to make croissants because he said they were the hardest thing and he wanted to do the hardest thing. The young man who stood at his father's grave and held my hand and said, "We'll figure it out, Mom. We always do." What happened between that boy and this? I didn't have an answer. I had a suspicion. Nathan had spent 10 years working beside me without ever being asked what he wanted. I had assumed he wanted what I wanted, to keep building, to keep growing, to keep Ashford's what it had always been. I had never once sat down with him and asked, "What does this look like for you in 10 years? What do you need that you're not getting?" Preston Cole had asked him those questions. I was almost certain of it. And Nathan, hungry for something I hadn't known to offer, had said yes to a man who was very good at asking the right questions for the wrong reasons. That didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't come close. But I lay there in the dark, and I let myself understand it, because I had learned from the hardest years of my life that you cannot navigate a crisis clearly when you are refusing to see any part of the truth. Wednesday passed in a careful performance. I went to the Birchwood location at 7 in the morning. I smiled at my staff. I tasted the morning's test batch of apple cinnamon scones and told Nina, my lead baker, that she had finally gotten the ratio right. I had a regular Tuesday call with Nathan, rescheduled to Wednesday this week, and I kept my voice even and asked about the Friday signing logistics and said I was looking forward to the next chapter. He sounded relaxed, almost warm. The way someone sounds when they believe the hardest part is already over. That evening, Ruth called. Daniel had sent her the full report. She had reviewed it with a colleague who specialized in financial fraud. "We have enough," she said. "Wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to defraud. Carol's liability is significant. She's a licensed CPA and she constructed the documents. Nathan's exposure depends on how much the DA wants to pursue. Preston is the primary architect. What are our options?" "Two paths," Ruth said. "First path, I file an emergency motion to freeze all Ridgeline and Crestwood accounts tomorrow morning. You don't sign Friday and we pursue civil recovery plus criminal referral. Quiet, private, controlled." "And the second path?" "A pause. The signing is scheduled at your attorney's office with all parties present. Nathan, Preston, Carol, you. If you walk in informed, you can let it play out. Let them present the fraudulent documents in a formal setting, on record, in front of witnesses, and then you respond." I thought about that for a moment. How long have they been doing this to me, Ruth? At least 14 months, possibly longer. And Carol has done this before? Ruth's pause was a half-second too long. Daniel found a connection to another transaction 3 years ago. A family-owned hardware business in Murfreesboro. Owner in his 70s. Sold for significantly under market. Business closed within 18 months. I closed my eyes. "The second path," I said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, it'll be harder. I know. It will change things with Nathan permanently." "They're already changed," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." Friday came in gray and cool, the sky the color of old pewter. I wore the blue dress I had worn to Nathan's culinary school graduation 16 years ago. Gerald had bought it for me the summer before he died, told me I should have something fine for important occasions. I'd had it taken in twice over the years. It still fit. I arrived at Ruth's office at 9:50. Nathan and Preston were already in the conference room. Carol came in at 9:58, carrying a leather portfolio and not quite meeting my eyes. Nathan stood when I walked in. He hugged me. He smelled like the bakery, yeast, and brown sugar. And for one moment, I was standing in my kitchen in 1987 holding a 12-year-old boy, telling him that everything was going to be all right. Then I sat down. Preston set the documents on the table. 14 pages. He walked through them in his professional conference voice, smooth and measured. The valuation, the transition timeline, the consulting arrangement for the first year of Nathan's ownership. Everything calibrated to sound generous while delivering something else entirely. Carol slid page 9 across to me, the signature line. I looked at it. Then I looked up. "Before I sign," I said, "I'd like to go through the Greenfield valuation methodology, line by line." A silence moved through the room like weather. Preston recovered first. "Of course, we can schedule a follow-up review with Carol next week if you'd like additional time. I'd like to do it now," I said. "I have the questions ready." I opened my folder. The first document I placed on the table was Daniel's forensic accounting report. 47 pages, tabbed, with every Ridgeline transaction highlighted in yellow. No one spoke. I looked at Carol. 16 years, I said, not as an accusation, as a fact. I trusted you with everything Gerald and I built. Carol's face went the color of the sky outside. I turned to Preston. Ridgeline Business Partners, LLC. Delaware registration, March of last year. You and my son. Preston started to stand. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sit down." My voice was quiet. He sat. I turned to Nathan last. This was the part I had rehearsed. Not the words, I hadn't written them out, but the steadiness. I had stood at Gerald's grave in the rain and not broken. I had sat in a bank office in 1989 and been told I was 6 months from foreclosure and not broken. I was not going to break now. "Nathan," I said, "I need you to look at page 12. He didn't move. "Page 12, I said again. He opened the report. He turned to page 12. I watched him read. I watched the moment he understood exactly how thoroughly Daniel had documented everything. He set it down slowly. "Mom, I'm going to let you listen right now," I said. There's someone I'd like you to hear." I took out my phone and pressed play. Daniel had helped me prepare one additional item the night before. A recorded statement from the former owner of Callaway Hardware in Murfreesboro. A man named Robert Finch, 74 years old, who had sold his family's business 3 years ago through an accountant named Carol Simmons and a consultant named Preston Cole for $340,000 less than its appraised value, who had watched his store close within a year, who had spent the past 8 months trying to understand what had happened to him. Robert Finch's voice filled the conference room. Steady, unhurried, 22 years of sweat and early mornings in every word. When it finished, the room was absolutely still. Preston stood up abruptly. I need to make a call. The conference room door opened. 2 men in plain clothes stood in the doorway. Ruth had been thorough. She had contacted the district attorney's office on Wednesday afternoon and been directed to a detective named Fales who had been building a financial fraud case for 11 months and was very interested in what she had to say. Preston Cole, Carol Simmons. You're being detained for questioning in connection with wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Preston said something I won't repeat. Carol said nothing. She picked up her portfolio from the table with both hands, set it back down, and then sat very still while Detective Fales read from a card. I watched them leave. Then it was just Nathan and me and Ruth and the October light coming through the window. Nathan had not moved. He was looking at the table. "Preston told me you were ready to let go," he said finally. His voice was low. "He said you'd never admit it, but you were tired and the business was declining, and if I didn't act now, there wouldn't be anything left to take over." I waited. "I knew the valuation was off," he said. "I told myself it was just a business decision, that you'd retire comfortably either way. That I was protecting the business." "You were protecting yourself," I said, not harshly, just plainly. He didn't argue. "Did you know about Robert Finch?" A long pause. "No, I didn't know about the hardware store." He looked up. "I swear to you I didn't know Preston had done this before." I believed him about that. I wasn't sure it mattered. I stood up. I put the forensic report back in my folder. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. "I'm not signing anything for a very long time. Ashford stays in my name until I decide otherwise, and I will make that decision when I trust my own judgment again, which is not today." I looked at my son. He looked like he had the night Gerald died, young in a way that had nothing to do with age, unmoored, searching my face for something I wasn't sure I had left to give him. "I love you," I said. "I have loved you every day of your life. But what you did, what you allowed, is going to take a long time to understand. And I need you to give me that time without asking me to move faster than I'm able." I walked out of the conference room. Ruth followed and closed the door behind us. In the hallway, she squeezed my arm once. "You did that cleanly," she said. I nodded. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that. October passed, then November. Preston Cole was charged on 6 counts. His attorney began negotiating almost immediately. Carol surrendered her CPA license pending investigation and was charged alongside Preston. Robert Finch's case, which had gone nowhere for months, was suddenly moving. Nathan was not charged. The DA determined he was a secondary participant who had not personally moved funds or falsified documents. He had been complicit in a plan he hadn't fully understood. Whether that was true or whether it was convenient, I couldn't say with certainty. I chose to believe the version that left room for something to survive. He called me every week. I answered about half the time. The calls were short and careful, and neither of us said the things that needed saying, because neither of us knew yet how to say them. In November, I hired a new accountant, a woman named Patricia Dunn, who came with 3 references I personally called and an office in the next town over, which meant she had no history with anyone in Clover Falls. I also brought in an outside business consultant, a retired woman from Chattanooga named Gloria Hess, who had run her own specialty food company for 30 years and charged by the hour and had no interest in acquiring anything. We went through every contract, every supplier relationship, every account. It took 6 weeks. What we found underneath the damage Preston and Carol had done was a business that was still fundamentally sound. The wholesale contracts were real assets, not liabilities. The brand had value. The staff, Nina and the others who had been there for years, had held things together quietly while the people above them were conducting other business. I gave Nina a raise. I gave everyone a raise. I told them what had happened in broad strokes, leaving out the family part. They deserved to know their work had been undermined and that it was over now. December came. Clover Falls put up its lights. Gerald's apple tree lost the last of its leaves and stood bare against the pale sky, patient as it had always been. On December 12th, Nathan came to the farmhouse. He called first. I said yes. He sat at the kitchen table where he had eaten 10,000 breakfasts and put both hands around a mug of coffee and said, "I need to tell you some things." I sat across from him. He talked for almost 2 hours. About Preston, how it had started with a conversation at that Knoxville conference about the difficulty of generational transitions, how Preston had spent months establishing trust before ever suggesting anything improper, how gradual it had been, how by the time Nathan understood the shape of what was happening, he had already signed documents and was already afraid, about his own hunger for something he had never named to me, the need to prove that Ashford's could be his own, not just the thing he inherited from a woman the whole town admired. About the shame that had been accumulating quietly for years. "I felt invisible in this business," he said. "Not because you made me invisible, because you were so capable that there was never any space that needed filling. I thought about that for a long time. I should have asked you," I said finally, "what you needed, what the future looked like to you. I assumed. I should have told you instead of listening to someone who told me I could take it." We sat in the kitchen for a while without talking. "I don't know what the right ending to this is," I said. "I don't know if you ever come back to Ashford's. I don't know if I want that yet. But I don't want to lose you entirely." I looked at him. This man who had been a boy asleep on flour sacks, who had held my hand at his father's grave. "That I know." He nodded slowly. His eyes were wet. "I'm going to need time," I said. "And I'm going to need to trust what I see, not what I'm told. That means slow. That means earning it." "I know," he said. "I'll be here." He left at dusk. I stood on the porch and watched his car move down the gravel lane and disappear. Spring came early that year. The apple tree budded in late February, weeks ahead of schedule. And by March, the kitchen at Birchwood was turning out a new line of recipes that Nina had developed over the winter. Honey lavender shortbread, a brown butter tart with local pears, a sourdough that took 3 days to make and was worth every hour. In April, Preston Cole accepted a plea agreement. 4 years. Restitution to both Ashford's and the Finch estate. Carol Simmons received 2 years suspended plus 5 years probation and permanent revocation of her license. Robert Finch's family received a settlement that allowed them to pay off the debts the sale had left behind. He called me after the agreement was signed. He had a voice like old wood, warm and a little worn. He said thank you, and I told him he didn't owe me anything, and he said he'd been saying that prayer for 8 months, and I was the answer to it. I didn't know what to say to that. I said thank you back and meant it. Nathan started his own small operation in April. A single-location cafe in the next county, a clean start with none of the complicated history. He named it Gerald's. He sent me a photo of the sign the day it went up. I looked at that photo for a long time. He had named it for his father, for what we had both lost and both carried, for the thing underneath all the damage that had still managed to survive. I typed one word back, beautiful. And then, because I meant it and because some things deserve to be said plainly, I'm proud of you for starting over. If you're still with me, comment still here so I know you made it to the end of this one. And tell me honestly, if you had been sitting at that table on Friday morning with everything on the line, would you have played it the way I did? Or would you have walked away quietly and let the law handle it on its own? There's no wrong answer. I've thought about it myself more than once. What I know now, a year later, standing in a bakery that still smells like cinnamon and still has my name on the door, is this: I almost handed over everything I built because I stopped asking hard questions, not just about the people around me, about myself, about the ways I had been so focused on protecting what I built that I forgot to tend to the people inside it. Nathan was right about one thing. I was capable, and I filled every room I walked into, and I never left space for him to grow beside me rather than behind me. Preston Cole exploited that, but I created it. That's not a comfortable thing to say. It's the truest thing I know how to say. The people you love don't need you to be invincible. They need you to be present. To ask the hard questions before a crisis forces them. To leave room in the story for someone else to be needed. I learned that too late to save the trust I had with my son before it broke. I learned it just in time to build something different from the pieces. If this story gave you something to think about family, about trust, about the difference between protecting your legacy and protecting the people inside it, I hope you'll subscribe so you don't miss what I share next. Every week I'm here with another story, and every one of them is really about the same thing, how we find our way back when the ground shifts under our feet. Thank you for walking all the way to the end with me. It means more than you know.